Welcome, Jesters. I know this is not a really new thing, but it is being talked about a lot over on X, so I thought we would just start talking about it, and that is NIMBY versus YIMBY. So the NIMBY's NIMBY, not in my backyard, contrasted with the YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. People who are sometimes both simultaneously opposing and advocating for development in various places. And while I think a lot of the participants in this debate are very reluctant to draw certain lines, you know what, I'm just going to enter the fray by saying that NIMBY is primarily a leftist standpoint, while YIMBY is primarily a right-wing standpoint for various reasons. And the one thing that you will notice about the left, which clearly is probably the most distilled version of NIMBYism that we have today, is with the migrants. When you ask them about migrants, they will be out there advocating for open borders and welcoming asylum seekers and blah, blah, blah. But when you ask them if they are willing to house migrants, the answer is never yes. Never, never, ever. There's gazillions of videos of people interviewing just politicians, prominent figures, just people at protests, whether they themselves are willing to have the asylum seekers in their neighborhood, and the answer is never, ever yes. And it is becoming almost a meme that the prominent proponents of unchecked immigration tend to live in very isolated and ethnically, well, neighborhoods of a certain ethnic type, if you know what I mean. White neighborhoods. They live in white neighborhoods, right? So they are the ultimate NIMBYs, right? The everyone else can deal with immigration except us. Those are the ultimate NIMBYs, and they are all leftists. However, there are some other factors that kind of lead me to this conclusion, and a certain class of NIMBYs, basically on the lower end of the scale, they don't want things built in their neighborhood that they don't consider affordable. But it's not necessarily affordability. They just want these supposedly affordable projects laden up with all sorts of other ridiculous nonsense, like green spaces and laundry and access to transit and, childcare and EV chargers and all this other stuff. They want to pile on this stuff that they think makes a building or a neighborhood affordable, which simply adds to the cost, right? So they're blocking affordable housing and structures and everything in development because they don't understand what makes things actually affordable, right? And this is because fundamentally they don't trust the market. They really don't. So they are very suspicious of any kind of developer that has a profit motive coming in and building anything, right? They just do not want that. So they will sabotage all sorts of development simply because someone will make money off of it, right? They are oddly opposed very frequently to planned communities, even though they are walkable and family-oriented and have plenty of green space and everything like that. So yes, they are very, very suspicious of market forces. So they are NIMBYing those. And that follows on to another thing that I kind of realized today, that the leftist NIMBYs, they just don't trust landlords either. If you listen to them, they have a disdain for landlords, right? To them, a landlord is just an evil, greedy capitalist that just wants to exploit the tenants for profit, while they, gobble caviar on the golf course or on their yacht or whatever it is that they think landlords actually do. Them, of course, having absolutely no clue what it takes to be a landlord. So they don't want housing built because they literally see this just as a vehicle for landlords to exploit more tenants. Yeah, no, this is how they believe. So yes, the leftists are the essential NIMBYs. Now, as for the YIMBYs, the reason I say this is, primarily a right-wing position is because we respect development. We respect economic development. We respect land development. We appreciate and understand that it is very often necessary for growth. We also tend to generally respect private property rights, right? So yeah, you own a piece of land. You should be able to more or less do what you want with it, provided, and here's a catch though, it is within certain social norms. Like a lot of conservatives, and I tend to agree with this, do agree that there should be general zones, right? Industrial zones, business zones, residential zones, but within those zones, you can do a lot. We think things should be very flexible so long as certain norms, especially of the neighborhood, are are respected. Like this incident with the 3-story addition in was it Virginia or something like that? That was crazy. That was so out of place, so out of character for the neighborhood. I think the neighbors were right to complain because it was just not respecting of the norms of the neighborhood. And there were ways that they could have added all that family space to the house without building basically an apartment block. They could have just made a large house. It might have looked a little bit out of place, but not what they built, right? I think the developer and the architect just gave them the absolute cheapest option, and that's what they went with, right? Again, it's not really respecting the norms of the neighborhood. They could have had the space, but yeah, they didn't do it. They didn't do it right in a way that, was respectful to the neighbors. And I understand, the neighbors' response. And also, conservatives are probably a lot more akin to developing what we consider like bad, blighted, ruined neighborhoods, not because of any demographic issues, so don't even go there, but areas that were formerly business districts, like, dead malls, or land that is around, train and transit station, because, let's be honest, a lot of it's noisy, right? So you might as well build apartment buildings, and maybe that helps. I don't know. People seem to like it, so, go ahead and do that. So, yeah, we're all for building, more density and more shopping, more retail, stuff like that, around places that are already not so tranquil or not so nice, right? We would actually like to see these areas made better. Anything that's blighted or abandoned, yeah, go ahead, tear it down and build something new, right? And there's also an understanding I think people on the right have that, all of the things that, the left, I've seen them on X do this, try to scare, or suss out, the crazy right-wingers. They say, oh, well, you want to be a YIMBY. What if the government put this in your neighborhood, right? And, well, they say a nuclear power plant or a drug rehab facility. This is what they try to do. They say, oh, do you want a drug rehab center, next to your house? Well, let's be honest. I know that there is literally no chance that either a nuclear power plant or a drug rehab facility will be built anywhere near me because we don't put it this way, there's no way a nuclear reactor is going to go here. It's going to go down in Turkey Point. But there would be no point in building a drug rehab center around here because this is not the market for that. Let's just be honest, right? Coral Gables is not where you find the type of person who needs treatment that would need to go to a government facility, right? I'm sure there are clinics in the area, right? But that kind of facility, there would be no point in putting it in Coral Gables, so far away from the people who need it. It would be up, let's be honest, around Jackson or Allapattah. So yes, I would not object to the government wanting to build one of these centers because, well, quite frankly, it's just not going to be anywhere near me because that would be stupid, right? So, yeah, we are very well aware that these kinds of things are going to go where they're needed. And honestly, if you live in that kind of area, you have to kind of accept it because of like private property and things like that. So yeah. But there also is one other. Let's just say there is a little bit of NIMBYism on the right that we're seeing right now in the current debate, and that is around property taxes. And I do think a lot of otherwise conservative people are very suspicious of development, but particularly gentrification, because things like that do tend to, and this is part of the selling point really, raise the property values around these developments. They actually make it more desirable, or, realizing that it is a desirable area, developers do add more, which suggests that the area around it, the land around it, is actually worth more maybe than it had been assessed in the past. And this kind of gentrification and development raises assessed values, which raises taxes. And yes, people on the right would tend to object to that. So I will cop to a little bit of NIMBYism on our side simply because we don't want our taxes raised. And, that kind of development and gentrification does have, a tendency to do that. So yes, there is teeny bit of NIMBYism on the right, but it is primarily NIMBYism, a left-wing phenomenon, while, the yes to development is primarily, a right-wing position. So that is how I see this current debate, and I look forward to participating, with all the lefty NIMBYs and explaining to them why they're wrong, because I'm right.